Okay, so we're back for the second half for the patrons. So Ed, you mentioned that you had solicited some comments and feedback from people after the publication of your article
Yes.
that you'd like to discuss. So let's hear what some of the interpretations or objections for your article have been.
Sure. Yeah. So I have a politically diverse group of friends, and so in the past few days, after sharing the article with them, I've asked them for some feedback. And I guess what I thought we could try to do is, rather than trying to knock down the criticism, rather like see what's correct in it, see what's right in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now I'll say I have one friend who's she's a Sandinista, but her parents are very probably much like your family and mine, very solid kind of swing voters, Obama to Trump, and even people who went initially for Sanders in the 2016 primary and then voted Trump in the 2016 general election. So obviously I have a certain kind of political conscience that's derived from Marxism, but I have another one that's sort of derived from my my personal life. And it's kind of like people like that in a way who I would want my writing to most pass muster with. And so I was actually uh, sort of sensitive when my friend told me, oh, I shared it with my parents and they had a criticism. I was really sort of apprehensive to hear what it would be. And I ended up kind of being delighted by this one because they said they couldn't tell which side I was on. Uh,
Yeah,
and I thought, okay, well,
that's good.
that I take as high praise, and maybe just one other comment, here in the context of sublation, I don't. I guess this analogy invites criticism, so I don't want to take it too far. But I remember being really surprised and intrigued when reading the biography of James Burnham, that in the 1930s, um, within American Trotskyism, he was one of Trotsky's sort of top three American lieutenants.
Yep.
And and if I'm not mistaken, Shachtman was sort of the on the international beat, like international affairs, and out of that context comes Shachtman's theorizations of the nature of the Soviet Union. Cannon was sort of on the domestic labor working class organizing beat. And I think even the SWP in the U.S. retains some semblance of that
Yes.
in its
Yes.
character. And then Burnham was sort of on the like you might say capitalist politics.
Intelligentsia. Oh,
Yeah,
capitalist politics. I see.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. The American elite, yes, the intelligentsia, but also sort of capitalist politics writ large. And so, just I think you see that in 1930s American Trotskyism, and also of course you see that you referenced Debs and the elections of the early 1900s. Just the notion of a third perspective that one would want to at least try to observe things
Yeah.
from a kind of perspective that would fit neatly neither within Republican Party or Democratic Party assumptions. And so that I took that particular criticism I took as a compliment. Sort of
You know,
become
the moral of that story about Burnham, though, is perhaps one should be wary of what one pays attention to because it might warp your perspective.
it's so funny. Before I was thinking about mentioning this, and I was thinking about those words. That's exactly, I think, what you told me years ago when I did a deep dive into Burnham. Yeah, because you're right. You're right about that. And I did notice that in the course of writing this piece as well. I mean, you even indicated it previously with the Overton window. You read so much of this sort of commentary on capitalist politics, and it becomes very difficult to actually avoid just taking on its like frameworks and assumptions, even if in another intellectual context, like you might have a completely different framework and maybe other things to say. But yeah, you do sort of give over to the material, unfortunately. Yeah, and I may have
Yeah,
done.
you get defined by your object in a way.
Yes.
So maybe Cannon was guilty of a certain kind of workerism. Shachtman notoriously became like a Cold War social democrat. Maybe not, maybe he didn't, but maybe he did. And that Burnham became an elite theorist because he was focused on the machinations of capitalist politics.
Yeah, exactly. So these are, yeah, and so these are the liabilities of trying to write a piece in the way that I did, is that, yeah, you
It's
do.
journalism. We could talk about that, which is to say that I myself have I think that we've written very different articles, but one thing in common in our writing for Compact is at least this kind of journalistic kind of just reporting, you
Hmm.
know, and constellating, arranging well-known facts or easily available facts, so it doesn't involve any like primary investigation kind of digging up of unknown facts, nor does it have to rely too heavily on a overarching interpretive framework, but
Hmm.
letting the
Hmm.
facts speak for themselves. And also, that involves the facts of discourse, of the public discourse and how things are being understood. Uh,
Yes.
And I think that the danger there is, as Alex Gorovich criticized me, of just contributing to the discourse. So
Yeah.
the only thing that one can do is to, if one is going to trade in or traffic in the mainstream capitalist political discourse, at least rubbing it against the grain.
Yeah, and I hope my piece at least succeeded in doing that. Like, I hope that if it's wrong, it's at least like interesting, like it at least makes you think in certain ways that are more interesting or kind of.
That's the goal. The goal, these are thought pieces. I think the Compact magazine, like Sublation magazine, is really geared towards thought pieces,
Hmm.
meaning not only are they our thoughts, maybe they're not even our thoughts, but they're
Yeah,
meant to make the readers think.
yeah, yeah, yeah. These are the thoughts of society.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So it's a tricky business because I think that people want opinionation and they want punditry, they want to hear our opinions, and they want to sort of relate to us on the basis of our opinions. And they may not get them,
Right, right,
right?
right.
So yes, so what were
So
some
that.
other concerns raised by your readers?
Yeah, so the second one, and I'm probably, of the four, I may be like the least sympathetic to this one, but I do want to try to find a grain of truth in it. Like some of my friends who were coming from, in one case, a kind of, well, some kind of Marxist, like broad Marxist perspective, not platypus or sublation, and in another case, a kind of, liberal progressive Democrat. They basically just said, Tyler Robinson has really nothing to do with progressive or liberal or Democratic Party politics. This is just, and actually, I have a Sandinista friend who kind of said something similar. This is just like Zoomer. This is just the wilds of like Zoomer internet culture and Zoomer generational hopelessness, and this doesn't really express anything political. Now,
It's
this,
gamer culture. It's
yeah,
ideologically incoherent.
right,
I mean,
right,
yes,
and
on first pass, this is part of the Democratic Party's like disavowal,
right.
like denial. It's a form of denialism, but let's try to get at the kernel of truth.
Yeah, because so I will say this, like having worked in the profession of librarianship for 15 years, having worked on a campus for 10 years, knowing the left very well, following it with Platypus, and even before that for the better part of 2 decades, as soon as I saw those words, some hate can't be negotiated out. I just thought, okay, case closed. Like ideologically, case closed. But again, to give my critics their due, there were plenty of other messages that I don't claim to understand. I did not do a deep dive into each one, decoding each one of the symbols. And I will say, one of my friends is something of a scholar of like Zoomer internet culture in her own right, and she sort of said, no, these have like these specific meetings that you're not attending. And so I do want to acknowledge there's more there than it's true. There's more going on there than just
It
some
could
hate.
also be it could also be the case, it just occurs to me that in the culture, the Zoomer gamer online culture, maybe these signs and symbols and this language has a definite meaning, but that doesn't mean that Tyler Robinson understood all that.
That's true.
In other words, he might have had a superficial understanding of the meaning of these things,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that the anti-fascist stuff was especially highlighted by Democratic Party people, commentators saying, oh, well, it means the opposite of what you think it means. In other words, it seems like Antifa, but actually it's the Groyper reappropriation of Antifa or something like that.
Yeah, and that,
Right.
that seemed stretched to me. I suppose it could be the case that seemed like a wishful stretch of interpretation to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it seemed to me too, because I don't think that this guy, the assassin, is a hardcore ideologue, but that
Right,
means that you can just sort of take it at face value and just sort of, more obviously when a right-wing person is killed, then likely it's out of political opposition. It's not, it's not like the Occam's razor explanation is the simplest, which is to say, of course, it's someone who generally sees Charlie Kirk as a threat and
right.
not as some insidious threat of selling out the right wing. No, as a threat in the way that all Democrats see him as a threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah,
You know
yeah.
what came up also, I'll just put this out there. Maybe it's something that we can come back to, which is the conservative or Republican Party point is that they couldn't beat him in debate, Charlie Kirk, so they had to kill him.
Right, right.
And what that poses is just the question of what winning the debate would mean, right? They couldn't win the debate, so they had to kill him. And also, who won the debate? Did Charlie Kirk win the debate or did Trump win the debate? Meaning, has the debate been won in the sense of it's all past now? Like Trump has happened, and we
Yes,
can complain about it, and we can shoot the messenger or what have you, but there really is no going back. And
right.
so, is it that Charlie Kirk was a great debater? And they couldn't debate him, and therefore they had to shoot him instead, or is it rather the debate's over?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why that's why I wrote the article that I did. Again, whether it's right or wrong, that's why I sort of, and I think in an original version of the article, I even said, this is more historically specific. I like had that line, this is more historically specific than is commonly acknowledged. Like this did not happen in 2024. This did
Yes.
not, we had 2015 or maybe strictly 2016, through 2024 in which this could have happened. It didn't happen in any one of those years. I mean, things like it have happened, but this particular instance is actually, when the Democrats have election after election lost more of the youth, right? Like they're
Right. Why Charlie Kirk in particular?
the Obama narrative is demographics is destiny, and the young people are just going to be on our side, and now it seems demographics is destiny in reverse. Like young men, and Kirk talks about that with Newsom. Young men are completely flocking to Trump and Trumpism, and so it seems to me that this happening in 2025 is more historically specific, and
Yeah,
I
it
think
had
that
to happen after Trump's victory.
right, exactly, yeah, exactly. Um, so let's move on. But a third, and this is kind of actually a related point. Some of my Democratic Party aligned friends pointed out, as a lot of the commentaries pointed out, that the data, both rhetorically and statistically, shows that most political violence comes from the right, or conservatives, not the left or progressives. And a Democratic state representative was just murdered by a right winger. So they sort of thought the focus of my article was just misplaced. Like, why focus on the Democratic Party specifically, or on kind of, like isn't the story just mass polarization? And here I do want, I think this connects up perhaps to something that you wanted to raise. But I do think this expresses a truth. I don't see this as necessarily a counterpoint to my article, but I do see this as pointing to something that purely at a sociological level, I don't deny. So maybe you wanted to raise your post as well. In this context, it might be an appropriate time to
Oh,
discuss.
they are killing each other?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so but let's back up a second.
Okay.
So, actually there was an Atlantic article recently, I think, that says that actually statistics show that left-wing acts of political violence are on the rise and are becoming more predominant.
Right. So again, this is the question of like static versus directional thinking. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so, but looking at things from 1994 to 2025, this article says back then it did skew political violence did skew more towards the right, but now more recently it skews more towards the left.
Hmm.
And so that has happened. In other words, that's not directional, that's past, that's done.
That's already happened. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
already happened. And already the congressional baseball practice shooting that took place, it was by a Bernie supporter against the Republicans, the congressional Republicans who are at baseball practice.
Oh wow. Okay.
You don't recall this? Scalise was shot up pretty bad, right? Yeah, the shooter targeted the baseball practice of the congressional Republicans.
And a Bernie supporter.
Yeah, and it was a Bernie supporter, an older person, but a Bernie supporter.
Huh.
Um, and not as young as 22. So that's in Trump's first term. Um, and of course, there was Elias Rodriguez from Chicago, and at one time a member, I guess, of the PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation, who shot the Israeli diplomats in DC, killed them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and they weren't actually both Israeli. One was Israeli, one was American, but they were engaged couple. And I guess they both worked or had some association with the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. So those are sort of obvious cases.
Mhm.
And you know, I think that it's sort of undeniable, right? That the left has been taking this more terroristic turn for quite some time.
Right. And actually, that's something that I do think maybe even my friends who raise this criticism would acknowledge that you, Platypus, I want to say we, but certainly you, and certainly Platypus as an organization is much more attentive to the fine-grained sort of trends, mood, periodization on the far left. Like that's the whole
Right.
raison d'etre of Platypus. And a centrist or liberal, or progressive, or what have you, Democrat, just a mainline Democrat of some variety, simply won't be quite as attentive as we are to these things. Yeah, we see it across campuses, we see it across reading groups, across we have our feelers out. We're arguably one of the best sources of that kind of knowledge in the
I
present.
think Luigi Mangione has also been, I think people have denied that he represents the Democratic Party or the quote unquote left. So
Uh-huh.
there's the far left, the hard left. Elias Rodriguez, had some association with the PSL, but the PSL are known for just organizing protest demos that do blend seamlessly into Democratic Party politics. Um,
Right.
and on the Israel-Palestine issue, it is a live controversy within the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
It's long since become that. It's not as if being on the side of the Palestinians against the Israelis puts you outside the Democratic Party. It does not.
No, and we saw this one with Sublation with our film crew last year at the DNC, and
DNC, right?
our documentary
It
will
doesn't put you outside the Democratic Party one bit.
no, and yeah, right. It puts you exactly within it, like
Yeah.
almost only within it. Yeah.
And Zoran Mamdani running
Uh-huh.
for mayor on the Democratic Party ticket in New York, winning the primary there. So this is, a mainstream position. Anti-Zionism is a mainstream position within the Democratic Party. Ostensible anti-Zionism. Again, what that means, who knows? At the end of the day. So we don't want to give in to the demagogy of the right either, and say, oh well, this shows, like Trump himself said that Chuck Schumer had become a Palestinian.
A bad.
It's politics, but a bad Palestinian because a weak Palestinian.
Right.
Right. So, which again shows that maybe Trump's not unsympathetic to the Palestinian cause either. Right.
Indeed.
He
Yeah.
just likes strong Palestinians and not weak ones.
Right. Politically savvy and sober and serious. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And representing their side well.
Right.
Right. As opposed to the kind of feckless character of the Democrats.
Yeah.
So it's a maybe to get back to the earlier objection, maybe we didn't give it its kernel of truth.
Okay. Go ahead.
Which is the question of ideological coherence. Well, the issue is this: how much ideological coherence does capitalist politics require? None,
Mm.
none, zero. Right? So you can be a default Democratic Party aligned assassin, motivated, mobilized by incoherent politics, but that perfectly suits capitalist politics.
Right. And at the risk of writing over the point you just made, it occurs to me there may be a relationship here with the Democratic Party as well, because for those of us on the far left, the party means something.
Yeah,
Whether in the past 100 years of communist and other parties in communist and other states, or going back to our historical vision and future desiderata of a socialist party membership means something. And having thought in that way, for the past sort of 15 years of my life, what's really striking to me is the way in which institutionally and professionally I'm completely surrounded by Democrats, and none of them are Democrats, and yet they're
that's
all
right.
Democrats.
Yes,
Because
that's right.
what is it to be? You don't have a card, you don't go to meetings. You may even sometimes vote for a spoiler, or do a safe state or whatever, or not vote, and yet like there's a coherence and an incoherence to being a Democrat. And I don't know if that relates to the point you just made, but it's just
Yeah,
what came
yeah.
to.
No, that's right. Because yeah, first of all, the parties don't, they're both big tent parties. So they proudly both claim to be ideologically heterogeneous.
Hmm.
They don't demand ideological uh coherence. Nor is it required. And again, what we were talking about the silent consensus.
Yeah.
That goes for, within parties as well as between parties. So not only a silent bipartisan consensus, but also a silent partisan consensus that
Right.
if you
And
try to articulate it, then people will say, no, that actually doesn't represent me. And yet they are actually part of the same party. Now, partisanship, like my party right or wrong. And what we were talking about with Charlie Kirk and Gavin Newsom, well, these issues divide the public, and so therefore the parties in a representative democracy are obligated to represent the different sides of the issue.
right. Right.
Now, of course, from a socialist party perspective, and I think that one of the things about the campaign that confuses people is that we're trying to start out non-ideologically. In other
Yeah.
words, without ideological litmus tests. But that doesn't mean that as we develop, it will become the case that we adopt a solid ideology and there are ideological litmus tests. It could be that what everyone thinks of as ideological positions now simply won't apply ever,
Right. Could be others.
you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
so, meaning like, what socialism will mean will not fit into the current ways that people parse these things in terms of capitalist political ideologies. What we were talking about the first half, progressive, conservative, maybe
Right.
socialism won't accord with any of that. Or again, the kernel of truth in the beyond left and right, or anti-left or post-left socialism or Marxism or communism or what have you. Um, so, but
Yes.
a simpler point would be violence is right wing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and right wing means purely tactical, purely opportunistic, without any ideological criteria whatsoever.
Hmm.
And in this respect, it's right wing in the sense of Gore Vidal's sense of uh, there's only one party in the United States and it has two right wings
Right.
because they're both the party of property, the party of capitalism. And in fact, ideology, too much ideological coherence would not really work in terms of capitalist politics.
Because there needs to be enormous flexibility and opportunism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
And
to do what needs to be done, practically to do what needs to be done. And one
yeah.
might reach for ideological justification or not. And also, how deep does the ideological justification go? Meaning, you implement a policy, you explain it, you rationalize it, and then it's implemented. And then 5, 10 years later, when it's still the status quo, will it matter what people argued for it ideologically back when it was first adopted? It
Mhm.
won't really matter, right? It would
Right.
just be the
Right.
case.
Yeah.
Whatever the original intentions of the Civil Rights Act are, it doesn't matter because, 60 years later, it just is
Yeah.
the status quo, and people have found new ways of arguing for why it should be the case. That might be quite different from the original arguments in favor of it when it was adopted, and in
Right.
fact are quite different.
Yeah.
Like we can demonstrably say the way people talked about these policies in 1964 and 65, completely different from the way people talk about it now.
Yes. Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
And but also assassination, the role of assassination, especially in the case of so-called lone wolf actors. The motivation matters from a criminal standpoint, meaning whether this guy is going to be charged and convicted of being a terrorist. It will matter whether he was politically motivated.
Yes, and I'm sure the trial will bear this
It
out.
will bear this out. It will bear that some kind of political motivation was motivating the crime. It wasn't a crime of mere personal passion,
Right.
nor was it a crime of personal gain,
Right.
right? He wasn't like shooting Charlie Kirk because he had secretly taken out a life insurance policy on Charlie Kirk, and this was his way of making $1 million.
Right.
No, right? I mean, obviously, it can't work anyway because I don't think that people can cash in on murder, even if they are not themselves the murderer, right? Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
but so that it's not an ordinary crime. I think Benjamin Studebaker had said this, that he said a certain level of violence in society is just there, and so we shouldn't pay too much attention to it. No. No, 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 no. This is not part of the background violence of American society. This was a politically motivated act.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
yet, to say it's politically motivated doesn't mean it has to tick all these boxes of ideological coherence. Not at all.
Yeah. Right.
Not at
Exactly.
all. Because after all, how ideologically coherent is the partisanship in capitalist politics? Really,
Right. Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So we just have to be, careful about that. And the
Yeah.
propaganda of the deed is simply don't be Charlie Kirk or you might lose your life. Right? And don't be Charlie Kirk in these ways. Don't argue against trans rights.
Yeah.
Don't
That's
argue against Democratic Party race politics.
right.
You might die, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the warning. Now, as far as like they're killing each other
Yeah.
businesses, it really is a matter of meaning they are killing each other,
Both
meaning
sides.
they are not killing us, we are not
Right.
killing them. They
Yeah.
are killing each other.
Yeah.
It's not simply both sidesism. Even if it was only one side killing the other side, it's still them,
Yeah. Right.
right? And I think that, of course, what capitalist politics wants is for us to take sides and to be on their side, and especially through terror, meaning, are political assassinations meant to force us to become partisans in capitalist politics? Yes. And that's exactly what we have to resist, right?
Yes.
We have
And
to resist being terrorized or blackmailed into taking sides in something that we don't have a side in.
yeah, that's right. And at a personal level, I guess I can report purely at a psychological level, maybe combined identification in the sense that, as I mentioned, I can recollect what it was like to be sort of young and politically radicalized by the prevailing ideas on offer, by the kind of
Hmm.
progressive side in capitalist politics, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, as a big part of my professional life is actually organizing politically, intellectually diverse discussions among scholars and others on campuses. And so, um, where there were already many compounding layers of chilling effects, bureaucratic and professional and careerist, on the expression of conservative or Trumpian speech, before bullets are entered into the equation. So, at a personal level, I definitely found it difficult to completely abstain from any kind of identification with one side or the other. And yet, politically, I completely agree with you, in the sense that, you know, from a Socialist Party perspective, we wouldn't really be undertaking either of those actions, you know, but and yet there would be a desire to uh, see that kind of liberal practices in society can be sustained, coupled with the acknowledgement that, of course, they won't be. Um,
Right. So rights, access to campus, um, access to speech platforms. So I think that several years back, maybe first Trump term, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, like who were the big speakers on campus coming from the right,
mhm.
that the institutional and the student response that got a hearing from the institutions was, this speaker coming to campus makes us feel unsafe,
Unsafe, yeah, exactly. Hostile, unsafe environment.
right?
Mhm.
And so as it turns out, it was much less safe for Milo Yiannopoulos than it was for the students,
Indeed. Yeah.
right? But one could easily see conservative students saying, if a speaker comes to campus who endorses the assassination of Charlie Kirk, it will make them feel unsafe on campus, and therefore the administration should prevent that speaker from coming to campus. One
Of
can
course.
predict this with precision.
Right. 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 Turnabout.
Yeah. So, Brianna Joy Gray had a little tiff with Catherine Liu about the Charlie Kirk assassination,
Hmm.
and it was something along these lines, which is to say, Catherine Liu is trying to uphold the right of free speech. And what Brianna Joy Gray said is, but we have to be aware that everyone's obligated to condemn the assassination of Charlie Kirk as a litmus test in the same way that everyone was asked to condemn Hamas. And Catherine Liu was like, but in fact, we should condemn the killing of Charlie Kirk, right? Without any sympathy whatsoever for Charlie Kirk. In other words, that we can't, just say, no, we refuse to condemn, because that means underwriting Charlie
Right.
Kirk's message,
Yeah.
right? And so, in the same way that like people were asked to condemn Hamas, otherwise, right, the idea would be that somehow you support the action,
Right. And
right?
this brings to mind, you were in the audience when I gave a presentation years ago, and maybe we should link this in the show notes because I can't entirely recapitulate all of the historical research and argumentation here. But class people aligned with Class Unity organized a conference at the University of Chicago some years ago, and I gave a virtual presentation reconstructing civil liberties in general and free speech in particular as they figured in sort of 20th century Marxism, and in particular, the thought of some Trotskyist figures like Burnham, Cannon, and Draper, um, coming out of the broad Trotskyist tradition. And so maybe we could put that in the show notes because that's just sort of the classical Marxist and socialist point, right? That you don't need to endorse the viewpoint, but you endorse the freedom of its expression. You endorse the freedom of society, and the right of the listener to hear and to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So this has been, I feel like by now this is probably like doxa or catechism for a sublation audience, which is good. I think that's a good thing. But it still needs to be argued on the left.
Right. And the reason it needs to be argued on the left as well is because um, maybe one false polarization is statism, anti-statism too, meaning that one is concerned only with state action or parastate action, that one is only concerned with state repression of speech or parastate repression of speech, private entities acting on the state's behalf. But really, we should just, also be quite wary of civilian violence, which is what this was, right? The
Yes,
the Charlie Kirk assassination is civilian violence, and as civil social actors, socialists should also oppose civil social violence
right, of course,
and
of
see
course.
civil social violence as inherently right wing,
Yes,
as serving the right,
without wanting to
serving
blur,
capitalism.
yeah, and without wanting to blur the important distinction you just made, it is worth observing as the newspaper, The Militant of the Socialist Workers' Party, what I think in some ways did observe and probably would observe, namely that the U.S. state is essentially staffed by two political parties, the institutionally dominant one of which has made it a centerpiece over the past 10 years to characterize Trump and Trumpians as Hitler and fascist, and on account of their
Threat to
hateful,
national security.
yeah, and on account of their hateful ideas and rhetoric and policies and actions, and that's the precise ideology that seems to have motivated the shooter. So yeah, without wanting to say that it was state violence because it wasn't, nonetheless the connections are actually clear politically. Um,
Yeah, and but it's also part of, they are killing each other. It doesn't it's not a matter of wings of the state killing each other. Of course, that also happens.
mhm.
Um, but rather they're killing each other, like treating the Democrats and Republicans as part of civil society. They
Yeah, I
are.
see. Right, from a bottom up, and someone in Platypus, I'm forgetting who, but remarked on my article positively in that sense, that it kind of allowed for, it didn't have this sort of, the account I just gave was a little bit more top down, and I think there's something to that. But it's also important to see things bottom up, as like people are liable to be ideologized and politicized. These ideas may resonate with their own experiences. They'll take them into their own hands. It's unruly, and actually, I think it's true. Like the Democratic Party would have stopped Robinson if they could have.
Of course
Like
they would have.
even the people who are saying that Kirk had it coming probably would have advised Robinson not to take the shot.
Not to
Uh,
do it. Yeah, of course.
yeah, yeah. So there is this
And would
kind of
have simply preferred it not to have happened, meaning they might
right,
have directly counseled the individual not to do it, but they also more generally would have preferred it not to have happened at all.
hmm
Because, it is something that the Republicans can wave the bloody shirt of now.
right. Yes, Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Um, it's I think Catherine Liu in the conversation with Brianna Joy Gray, she said the problem is that Charlie Kirk was a sideshow who's now been turned into a martyr.
Right. Right. Right.
In other words, his death will be used to legitimate all sorts of policies, whereas in life he would not necessarily have had that influence,
Yes. Hmm. That makes
right?
sense.
Meaning, it's not as if Donald Trump is taking orders from TP USA, Turning Point USA. No,
No. Yeah.
right? Not at all. And neither is the opposite true. Neither were Turning Point USA simply giving the official Trumpian line, but rather they were putting their spin on it, the way like Steve Bannon or various others do.
Right.
What they want Trump to be, what they want the policies to be, and that they'll interpret the policies in a way that makes it seem like it's going in their direction, whether or not it really is.
Yeah.
So I brought up the example of the Ukraine war. And the reason I brought that up earlier in the first half was that that's been my approach to the Ukraine war. They're killing each other.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
That's my approach to the Gaza war. They're
Yeah.
killing each other.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a lot
Yeah.
more lopsided in the case of the Gaza war than it is in the case of the Ukraine war, of course. And they aren't really, equivalent by any means. However, the basic attitude is what's to be deplored about the death of Gazan civilians is that they're falling victim, they're collateral damage to a fight between people that we don't take a side in. In other words, the death of Gazan civilians is no argument in favor of Hamas. Not at all.
Right. And this gets to,
Or like
think
Hamas is preventing the civilian deaths or something, and that if Hamas were to be defeated by Israel, that somehow that more civilian deaths will ensue. No,
right.
no, right? And that's the thing. So again, it's something that everybody kind of knows, but can they acknowledge? And that instead people are blackmailed into taking sides.
Right. And this gets to, if I'm not mistaken, this gets to something that you've already pointed out in conversation with Doug. Um, namely like when we say they, essentially what that implies, if you're thinking about a future socialist party, if you're thinking about the conditions of possibility for change, is that we would prefer a world in which Tyler Robinson, insofar as he was radicalized or ideologized politically, would be disciplined to a lifelong task of organizing and educating, building a socialist party and movement,
That's
and
right.
likewise Charlie Kirk, who
Right.
his acknowledged was had many remarkable talents. We would want someone like that to be convinced not by
In the
you know
service of socialism. That's right.
yeah, we would want socialist Tyler Robinsons and Charlie Kirks to do to not become assassins, and not
Victims.
ultimately either to become Republican Party aligned youth organizers, but to help build socialism. And so that's sort of the way beyond, and that's also what we would say to of Hamas and Israeli fighters and so on.
Oh, absolutely. Of course. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it very straightforwardly, Charlie Kirk does represent a discontent with the status quo.
Yes. Yes.
And it's a shame that the discontents with the status quo are pretty much uniformly 100% enlisted into capitalist politics.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that what we represent, meaning they, meaning not us, not socialism, not the socialists,
Yeah.
um, and that's what they will remain, meaning we won't be defining ourselves against them, but we simply are not them.
That's right. They're killing each other, and we're doing something else.
We're doing something else. And the one goal is to not be caught in the crossfire.
Yeah. And I had
Not take sides and not caught in the crossfire. Meaning, if we deplore what's going on, it's because we might fall victim in the crossfire. We certainly don't want to enlist. Like, in other words, the way you don't fall victim to the crossfire is not you pick up a gun and take a side, but rather you keep out of it.
hmm hmm Yeah, sometimes in your conversations with Doug, he will turn to you and ask you very sort of searching questions, and I always love those moments. So I'm going to try to give the audience a Doug Lane moment here and ask, do you think that I've done that in the course of writing this article? Because I was sort of afraid of that, like by sort of writing in this kind of a little bit offbeat, but also in another sense like mainstream political journal and offering this commentary. Am I putting myself in the crossfire? Because so far I've really tried to sort of avoid that.
Right. Right.
And part of me that's even though I have academic tenure, that's still a little bit afraid of the potential consequences. And yeah, I don't know, maybe that's
I think we should always be asking ourselves this. And so, no, I do not think so. However, there was part of me that thought that the radicalization, if you will, or a sense of political mission that might come out of the Trump era might find other forms of satisfaction other than the struggle for socialism. Meaning, the thought that did occur to me is, and again, you brought up Wyatt
sure.
as an example that, at the end of the day, will you be satisfied by a realigned Democratic Party?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that
You
actually relates to coming around to it. I said I had four criticisms, and the most common criticism that I received from three distinct political quarters among my friends, one neoconservative, I'm sorry, one paleoconservative, one European social democrat, and one more, again, kind of like mainline centrist neoliberal Democrat. They all basically said in one way or another, this is your wish. Like what you're describing in your article is what you wish is happening or will happen. It's not what has happened, it's not what is happening, and it's probably not what will happen. This is just your wish of what
right,
to have happen.
right.
Um, and I
That's
suppose
their
again,
denial. Yeah.
okay, yeah, maybe, because
No, that's their denial. But you have to risk that,
you
right? In
do,
other words,
yeah, and
you
and
have to
and
risk this what the descriptive and the normative, or the descriptive and the aspirational, like are we just describing things as we wish they would be or are going to be, or not, you know
yeah, it's hard because there are like it's tricky, it's the kind of in the world but not of the world distinction.
right, right.
It's also the admitting versus conceding distinction because
Yep.
on the one hand, so like a word that
Admit
appears,
everything, concede nothing, my
yeah,
motto.
yeah, exactly. Because a word that appears twice in my piece, and I hope readers know it's not mine. You actually tipped me off to it because you shared the All In podcast episode in which David Sachs quotes Scott Adams, the
Yes.
kind of keen keen commentator on Trump, Scott Adams, who used this great word, the Hitlerization of politics. Um, and I have to say, just as an aside, in the Parrot Room, on an aesthetic level, some of the recent, I understand there's a lot going on. I don't follow him very much personally or politically, but this really hit home to me with some of Kanye West's recent songs.
Uh-huh. Oh
I don't
yeah, right, right.
whatever is going on there, Groiper, Fuentes, maybe mental issues. I don't know. I can't comment. But I just realized like, oh, these are like the perfect these songs are like the perfect send up, whether they intend to be or not, of the Democratic Party's Hitlerization of our politics and the kind of pitch that it's reaching now and has long kind of reached or been reaching for. Um, and so, when
You mean it's like you're calling us this, and so yes, we are this, and
yeah,
so we're gonna play it up in order to show how absurd it is?
Yeah, how absurd it is. Yeah, exactly. And so I found the song is kind of like funny and in that way as like a kind of dark commentary on the
I bet you
Democrats.
that's intentional.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure, again, I don't follow them that closely, but I'm sure it is. And so, in that sense, right? Like if we just accept that Kanye West aesthetic point, that kind of Scott Adams like literal point about the Hitlerization of politics, it's like, yeah, yeah, I do wish that that hadn't happened. Like
Had
I do
not happened. That's right. Had
like
not happened.
I'm in
No,
an
it just gets so thick, right? With like irony or something. Meaning,
right,
is it kind of like, okay, you're gonna accuse me of being a Nazi, and so actually I'm gonna think about it and maybe I'll decide I am a Nazi, but then I'm gonna do something like go back and say the Nazis aren't what people say they were, in which
right,
case you're not actually accepting the accusation. You're doing this
right.
other thing. And so there are so many layers to it that I wish that didn't happen. Meaning,
Yeah,
I wish that we could just get to the point, which is post neoliberalism, not fascism. Come on.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And
And you
so,
just deal with the droll, like, reality of it, you know?
right, exactly, exactly. And so, yeah, and I wish now that I had included, some line in my piece to that effect, namely, like instead of Hitlerize, like if the alternatives are resistance and realignment, can we also think about the alternatives as like Hitlerization versus post neoliberalism? Like
Hmm.
isn't that just a more honest and straightforward, and whatever your politics, like in whatever context you're trying to educate, whether it be platypus or sublation or just a pure like liberal bourgeois, whatever you're doing nowadays, it just seems like that is so degrading and distracting that, yeah, so I have to cop to that criticism. Like, I wish this would happen, you know, and like I wish this would change.
I mean, look, what it comes down to is this 2028, Gavin versus AOC.
Right.
Now, again, they're killing each other, meaning to my mind, do I have a preference over whether it's Gavin or AOC? Only in the most perverse sense. Meaning, in a very perverse sense, yes, there is some kind of cosmic justice to the wokeism that they're just going to put up another straight white guy after all,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Right.
On the other hand, it's like, okay, so in order to be progressive, you have to be a woman of color, and she may or may not have married her fiance, but they're probably not going to have children, and so there's going to be some kind of like, despite her being straight, she's still like not going to be a traditional family woman or something. Do you
Right.
know, like, is that like justice? You know, like, okay, here's your Democratic Party. um do I aesthetically, do I prefer one over the other? And also the added thing is, am I choosing who I'd like to see win, or am I choosing who I'd like to see lose against the Republicans? In other words, do I want JD Vance to defeat Gavin Newsom, or do I want JD Vance to defeat AOC, or do I want Marco Rubio to defeat AOC so that it can be Latino on Latino? Right? And it's voyeurism. At the end of the day, we have to admit it's voyeurism. It's
Yeah.
spectatorship. It's
Right.
spectator sports.
That's right.
You know, and so it's still them.
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
In other words, you're rooting for a team. Doesn't matter how passionately you're a fan of a team, you're not a player.
Right. Right. Right.
You're not playing, you're watching.
Yeah.
And
That's
yes,
right.
sports fans do beat each other up and even kill each other over their fandom, but they're still not players.
So let me ask then, because again, going back to this tricky balance that you have tried to strike, you have struck, sort of entering like conducting commentary and writing of this kind, in venues like Compact. Um, in the face of that risk, how do you like when you think about writing and trying to sort of teach and educate your audience, commenting on capitalist politics, um, recognizing the spectator character and trying to trying to kind of push the writing beyond that, but understanding all the time that that's the
Hmm.
gravitational pull. That's the way it's going to be read. Yeah, I don't know if I have a clear question, but how do you handle that? Like, how do you think about yourself as a writer, like trying to address that?
That's a good question. So Sohrab Ahmari, who used to be one of the central editors of Compact, he and I spoke. We had a book talk together on his book Tyranny Incorporated, and my book The Death of the Millennial Left 2 years ago in New York City at Columbia University, of all places. It was
Mhm.
before the October 7th attacks.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember that dialogue. Yeah.
yeah, and what he said was that he had been approached by a Republican Party operative, and that person had put it to him, do you want to be a commentator or do you want to be a player?
Hmm.
And that ultimately Sohrab was like, I'm probably not going to be a player, I'm just going to be a commentator,
Hmm.
right? And so the journalistic aspect is, we have to understand that we're commentators and that uh we might be influencing the way people think about these things, including players, including the way players think about these things. We might be. Um, but still, we ourselves are in the position of commentators, and our audience is generally composed of commentators. And so the question of how one ought to look at these things. Well, how one ought to look at these things is to understand what is happening, what is likely to happen. You spoke about the directional character of your article. So, in my Musk and Trump piece, the most recent piece I wrote for Compact, I talked about Musk having conflicts with Marco Rubio and with Scott Bessent, and it was over the IRS and over USAID. Was I happy that Elon Musk got his comeuppance from the likes of Bessent and Rubio? Right? Not necessarily. Would have been happier if Musk had defeated them? Had defeated little Marco and had defeated this kind of patrician, yes, gay, kind of Southern white guy who seems like a standard neoliberal economist, in the name of post-neoliberalism and what I think is going to happen, and what I, want my predictions to be confirmed about or something. Well,
Hmm.
no, because I've always understood that post-neoliberalism liberalism was going to be continuity and change. And
Yeah.
so the fact that Besant and Rubio represent continuity
Hmm.
and yet
Hmm.
also clearly represent Trumpian post-neoliberalism, and that Musk served a role in that, but ultimately wasn't on board in it. He was, ultimately not convinced. Um, he's not as politically sophisticated as Bessent and Rubio or as Trump. And neither really is Steve Bannon, right? That these are ideologues and they think of themselves as players. Like Elon Musk, I'm sure, thinks he turned the election in Trump's favor and therefore deserves to have a seat at the table and a voice. It turns
Right.
out he doesn't. In other words, that his role in electing Trump was in electing Trump. It wasn't about his role. It was about electing Trump, and ultimately
Right.
it's Trump.
The who whom.
Yeah, the who whom question.
Yeah.
And who's using whom? And at the end of the day, it will be Trump who's using everyone else. I mean, he
Right.
showed that in the first term. He's shown that pretty consistently.
Hmm.
And so when we are looking at these things, and again, do I prefer Trump to prevail over Steve Bannon? I guess in one respect, sure. In another respect, no, because ultimately I don't really have a stake in it. I mean, I just think it's highly unlikely that Steve Bannon is going to be reshaping American capitalism, whereas Donald Trump actually is.
Right. And yes, yes. And by parallel, I sort of thought in the article, it's in my article, I just thought, it's highly unlikely that in 10 years, the Democratic Party is still going to be dominated by this kind of resistance style politics, um,
Right.
like holding on, as you said, that the Democratic Party's line will still be that any deviation from its neoliberal era consensus is fascistic and Hitlerian. I think it's likely that in 10 years that will probably change. Um, I could be wrong, but that seems sort of historically specific to the last 10 years. Um,
You know what it is now, I think, Ed? I think that the only issue for the Democrats is not, like it will take them some time. So you point this out in your article. It will take them some time to figure this out. It has been taking them some time to figure it out. But at
yes.
the end of the day, they're going to be like post neoliberalism, yes, but we're going to do it better than the Republicans.
Right, right, right. Hmm.
And it's going to be better not at some abstract moral ethical level or at a rhetorical level. It's going to be better at the level of we're going to be more effective.
Yeah, delivering growth, delivering
We're
policy.
going to deliver, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it already came out in the 2024 election when Trump was trying to run on a 2016 drill baby drill. And Kamala Harris was like, we're already drilling more than you did, even in your first term.
Right, right,
This
right.
is just not an issue,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And on the other hand, Trump, will often say it's not that, he's exactly against the Democratic Party policies, but he's against the way they do them. That they're bad executors, they're bad implementers, and they don't know how to negotiate things. They don't know how to make it actually work. They don't know how to bring it across the finish line.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
this is what, again, the kind of my more naive public and maybe leftists like our audience are more credulous. So fall into the most naive of the naive public because they're ideologically
Yeah,
spellbound to certain concerns.
yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
can't accept is that Trump's immigration agenda is the same as George W. Bush in 2006 and Barack Obama in 2008. It's the
Right,
same agenda. It's the same
right.
policy. They're trying to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, and you point this out with respect to foreign policy as well,
That's
where it's
right.
very, very clearly the case there as well. Yeah, yeah. Right.
So,
So,
again, what we have to do is avoid being casualties, collateral damage, caught in the crossfire, right? What you were saying about, again, in the article, the conclusion of the article, is the Democratic Party worth killing and dying for? No,
right,
neither is the Republican Party,
right. Yes. Yeah.
right? Not for any wing of either party, not for either party,
Right, right.
right?
And that is where that was sort of an intentional concession to wanting to get published in compact, because
Hmm.
originally yeah, I think I might have said this already, but I had the Democratic Party as the last line. But you're right,
Yeah,
and not the resistance wing. I think the resistance wing is more pertinent to Charlie Kirk in this political moment, but right, yeah, either side, either
yeah.
party. Yeah.
Because the realignment people are not against the resistance people on principle. They're just like, it ain't working.
Yeah, exactly.
In
Exactly.
other words, it took them 10 years to figure out, actually, we can't resist Trump. I could have told
Right.
you that in 2015. There's
Yes.
no resistance possible. And
Yes.
so, yeah, it took Ezra Klein 10 years to catch up with me and be like, you know what? Actually, yeah, resistance is not possible.
Right. Right.
Right? So,
And
whether
it
we're
might,
10 years into the process or 12 years or 8 years or 4 years, have we restarted the clock in 2024? Maybe.
yeah.
Another point about Trump, does he care whether the Republicans or Democrats win in 2028?
No.
He doesn't. He doesn't really, because he's trying
Yeah.
to do everything he can purely on executive authority and then also pushing test cases before the Supreme Court. Irreversible change, meaning nothing that you need Congress for, nothing that you need legislation for, and also changing facts on the ground via executive order that cannot be undone by executive order.
This
Changing
is the
facts on the ground.
the Cortez burning the ships
Cortez
analogy.
burning the ships. That's It's a Cortez burning the ships moment, and he's doing it. He's doing it before the 2026 midterms, let alone before the 2028 presidential election, because he's not hinging his success on maintaining the Republican majority in Congress in 2026 or in having a Republican president successor in 2028. Meaning, he will disparage Gavin Newsom, who's the former boyfriend of the girlfriend of Eric Trump,
Oh,
Kimberly
I didn't realize.
Guilfoyle. Oh yeah. So
Okay.
when Donald Trump calls Gavin Newsom Gavin Newscum, he has a specific image in mind, which is that his son is hitting that Gavin Newsom used to hit.
Okay.
Right? He's
Okay.
got he's got a very graphical image in his head when he says it. But for all of his denunciation of Gavin Newsom, of course, he's trying to set up a situation where it will be fine if Gavin Newsom is the next president.
Yeah, I was going to say there's also necessarily an identification with Newsom there.
Right. In other words, like in 2028, will it be Don Jr. or will it be Eric Trump? Well, it kind of doesn't matter. It will be Gavin Newsom, who's pretty much interchangeable, including literally with
Right.
Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, at the end of the day, and I would say going into the 2016 election, I read his book,
Yeah.
Crippled America, How to Make America Great Again. And,
Yeah.
he basically laid out, as president, I can do X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Meaning I don't need Congress to do it. I don't need, you know, and I can do these things and it will be for the benefit of the country and it will be reversible.
I feel like you've probably I think that in your piece on the tariffs, you probably bore some of this out, but you should write a piece specifying this in relation to the 2028 election, like the point you're making now, and kind of like a laundry list of some of the irreversible policies and their effects, as well as the politics around this. I think that would be good, like something more
In other
consciously.
words, at the end of the day, will the Democrats really seek to no longer have the United States be the top oil exporter in the world? No.
Right, right,
Right? In other words, Trump, part of his plan, and he also continues to say, like, even though he condemns the Green New Scam, he also continues to proudly say that the US is ahead of the rest of the world on green energy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've taken note
Right?
of that.
And so it's one of these funny things where it's like, the government tries to force it, and all we're doing is letting India and China off the hook. And, if you really cared about climate change, you put more pressure on India and China, but nobody's really doing that. And then instead, we're supposed to buy this stuff from China, the windmills that don't even work or actually meet the energy needs.
Right,
Right. So
right.
all you're doing is putting money in China's pocket, but even China themselves, in China itself, doesn't use windmills.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
And they burn coal and we burn coal, but he said we burn coal more cleanly than they do because we're higher tech.
Hmm.
And we mine it more cleanly than they do because we're higher tech.
Right, right,
So again, the old issues, are you for or against fossil fuels? It's just a non-issue going into the future, meaning it's
right.
going to be fossil fuels, but it's going to be green,
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
counterintuitive as that sounds,
Right, right.
right?
Hmm.
So you know the issues, in other words, is there going to be some total wipeout like Maid's Tale of women's rights and LGBT stuff? No,
Right,
no. This stuff is irreversible. It's going to
right,
be an LGBTQA future. It's also going to be a reproductive rights future. And it's also going to be some kind of government policy to encourage childbirth future.
Natalism. Right.
Yeah, it's going to be all that. It's going to be Ezra Klein. Come on.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
And the people who are complaining about Ezra Klein, it's like, yeah, you can complain, but this is the way it's going to go.
Right, right.
This is the
Yeah,
way it's going to go.
right. And one of my friends who gave me some feedback on the piece lamented the fact that Klein isn't really paid attention to within the Democratic Party right now, but that could change.
The other thing
And
is that if we were to sit down and have coffee, so instead of wine and cheese with Bill and Hillary, if we were to have coffee with Ezra Klein in Brooklyn, and we said, aren't you conceding to Trump? He's like, no, I've always believed this.
right, right.
I haven't changed my mind in the face of Trump. This is what I've always believed, and I just think you have to heed the warning of Trump and listen to what I've always believed.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I could really summarize it well, but I think I sent you recently that Orrin Cass recently engaged in a discussion with, I think it was Matthew Iglesias, on the
Yeah,
topic, is the abundance agenda, which is associated with Ezra Klein, he's sort of advocated it. Is that just neoliberalism? And it gets to this question you raise of continuity and change, that
that's right.
it's simultaneously continuous, deeply continuous with neoliberalism, but also in some ways is a change from it as
Updating it, updating it,
well.
rejigging it. Right. In other words, isn't Orrin Cass a neoliberal after all?
Uh-huh.
Because that's
Uh-huh.
really the issue,
Yeah.
right? Because right. So I think that Orrin Cass, of course, wants to say, oh, it's just more neoliberalism. And the progressive Democrats also want to say, oh, Ezra Klein is just repackaging neoliberalism.
Hmm.
But the point is, aren't the progressives, the socialists, aren't they just neoliberal? And aren't the trade protectionists just neoliberal? Right. Because at the end of the day, aren't they defining success in the same terms? Aren't they ultimately adapting to the same reality?
Right. And I mean, maybe this is too basic a point, but you see that, in reading this book from 1984, The Neoliberals by Randall Rothenberg, they're talking about exactly what's at issue today, namely how to sustain and increase growth. Um,
Yes,
they're saying we have the same goals as the kind of New Deal to Great Society technocrats did, namely like sustained and sustainable growth. But we just need to make these changes to secure that on this kind of new change basis. Yeah.
that's right. No, that's right. What just occurred to me was the degrowth Marxism
Uh-huh.
and degrowth socialism, but also the defund police, but reimagine policing. And, again, I've lived long enough to know that policing is very different now than it was in the 70s.
Mm.
And so it's not about more or less police, it's about changing how the police work, meaning the police are far more bureaucratic now than they used to be. Like it
Mm.
used to be a lot of discretion was the cop on the beat, deciding or not deciding to roust someone, arrest them, beat them up in the alley, whatever. Whereas now everything is documented and bureaucratized. And so, therefore, when you are subject to police violence, it's 10 cops beating you down. It's not some cop beating you up in a back alley
Hmm.
individually, right? So, have the police become more or less repressive? So, all those changes were to make the police less repressive. But in many respects, of course, the police are more repressive now than ever,
Mm. Hmm.
right? But so policing was already reimagined and it didn't get rid of the police. It changed how they work. Did it make it any less repressive? Like, in other words, yes, you're
Right.
much more likely to go to jail than to be killed by the police in a back alley. Which is worse? Like at the end of the day, so even the sort of defund the police, which doesn't really mean defund the police, it means reimagine policing. Policing will be reimagined, but it won't be like less police or less repressive or less unjust. It will just look different.
Right, that the kind of liberal, like the kind of bottom-up popular liberal democratic demands for reform will actually issue into greater growth of the state, bureaucratization. Yeah.
Yeah. Where basically they'll say, well, we're not as cruel as we used to be. And yet
Hmm.
actually maybe it will be even crueler. But it won't fit the image of cruelty that we have from the past. And so therefore,
Exactly, and I'm sure there are very strong analogies and parallels here with respect to campuses as another institutional environment that the Kirk assassination brings to mind.
Yeah, what
The way,
free debate on campus really looks like.
right, right.
You know, was there free debate on campus in the 60s? There was a whole free speech movement in the 60s in order to open up campuses to debate. Did it do that? Did it not do that? Did it
Right.
make speech more restricted, less restricted? What happened? You know, I mean, what you'll find, I mean, when I was in college, I can tell you, it was very similar to now. It was this angst around the administrations and right-wing speakers on campus, underrated,
Mm, hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It was like, why should we let these speakers onto campus when they represent a political movement that's hostile to higher education as such,
Ah, right. Yes.
right?
Yes.
And yes, they're claiming their right to free speech, but they're trying to destroy the campus environment as a place of free speech. The terms have remarkably remained the same.
Yeah.
Remarkably remain the same.
Yeah. And this goes back, if I'm not mistaken, to even Sidney Hook's kind of social democratic anti-communist argument for curbing the speech of those who would curb the speech of others. Like you restrict the speech rights of those who, if they gain power, would restrict the speech rights of others. And uh,
Yeah, it's
it's
the Karl Popper argument that to preserve tolerance, you have to be intolerant towards the intolerant,
yeah, exactly, and
right?
it's
And
ostensibly
what is
liberal,
that?
becomes
What does
illiberal.
that even amount to? Because the illiberalism and the intolerance is not like really just about specific opposition to certain ideologies. It's more about the institutional structure itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's really about that. Um, and you know, again, right now, because we're living through this kind of transition to post neoliberalism, it is true that everything seems up for grabs and in question, and that we're kind of questioning the purpose of these institutions and how they function and what the principles are and what our true values are. But that might be exaggerated in terms of what the actual practical effects are and what the actual institutional changes are.
Yeah, yeah. I
Right?
certainly think so. I mean, yeah, this makes me think that I'm always sort of bombarded by this rhetoric of like the end of the university, working in higher education, and it seems like higher education as a sector will have a set of challenges, um, but but the case is really overstated. That
Yeah, it
like
will change, it won't go away.
right,
It
right,
will change, it won't go away. Um, and it will be improved.
yeah, it'll be reformed.
All right.
Mhm.
Thanks a lot, Ed. This was
Yeah,
good.
thank you, Chris. I appreciate this.
All right. Until next time.
Okay.